Hey everyone, welcome back to another video where I will be giving my review of Lord of the Rings Online's first expansion, Mines of Moria, and the experiences that I've had playing it on the legendary servers. While I will give a bit of history regarding this expansion, please keep in mind that my review is of the expansion in its current state on the progression servers of Mordor and Angmar as of the year 2025, and not a review of the classic Moria experience. There have been a wide variety of quality of life improvements and changes since the initial release, so this review in no way will be accurate to how the expansion was originally released. Mines of Moria, the first expansion to Lord of the Rings Online, was released in March of 2008 under the developer of Turbine and published by Codemasters. Publishing would switch hands a few times over Lotro's history, and Turbine would eventually split up into two developer companies. Warner Bros. Boston, which focused on developing games in the mobile sphere, and a spin-off studio which branded themselves as Standing Stone Games, who would continue to maintain Lord of the Rings Online and its sister MMO Dungeons & Dragons Online. Back when Moria was first released, the game was still a subscription-based game and had not yet transferred its model to free-to-play like it is today. One of the biggest selling aspects of the expansion was the introduction of two brand new classes. The Runekeeper, a mage-like class which could either DPS or provide healing in group fights, and the Warden, a unique class which uses a system known as the Gambit system, one that requires a lot of muscle memory to play, but proved over time to be a strong survivable class excelling at DPS and tanking. Players also saw the level cap get raised from level 50 to level 60, and were immersed with a dangerous and high-stakes adventure to complete with 7 6-man group instances, and an additional 2 3-man and 2 6-man group instances with a Lothlorien update that followed up after the initial release. Moria also released with 3 raids: the Vile Maw, which contains the Watcher in the Water, a boss taken straight out of the Fellowship of the Ring. Players have to combat through several phases and face several adds, mainly the Watcher's tentacles. The second raid was Filikul, which contained a single giant turtle that players had to face off against. This was considered to be the more entry-level raid compared to its counterpart. Lastly, in a future update, Dar Narbogud was released as a 6-boss raid with varieties of trash mobs to face in between each major battle. This was in many ways a spiritual successor to the Rift, a raid released in the vanilla Lotro update cycle. Overall, the Mines of Moria expansion was met with a lot of positive reception at the time of its release. Many people pointed out its cutting-edge world design, a massive open-world dungeon that not many had seen the likes of at the time of its release. However, it was also quite difficult to navigate at the time, with many dark areas and high enemy mob density. This would later get updated as the game progressed through its history, but is something to take note of. While an impressive zone, it definitely had a fairly balanced group of fans and haters. Despite this, it is often considered by the player base to be the best Lord of the Rings Online expansion ever released. This was a period of time where Turbine Studios had a much larger budget for the game, and given the fact that it was a much younger MMO, had a fairly large player base at the time. Not anything comparable to World of Warcraft, but still respectively large. Many would consider this time period to be the golden age of Lotro. Of course, you could also say this was also the golden age of MMOs. This expansion released beside World of Warcraft's Wrath of the Lich King expansion. MMOs like Age of Conan, Warhammer Online, and Wizard 101 were also released during this era. Lastly, let's not forget that this was also the time where Lotro introduced the legendary weapon mechanic, where classes were given drops of 3rd Age, 2nd Age, and 1st Age weapons, which could all be leveled up and reforged, becoming more powerful as you leveled. First Age weapons were the top tier and rarest finds, while Third Age were more common yet less powerful versions. This would become a core game mechanic throughout Lotro's lifespan. However, significant changes would be made, altering and streamlining how the system worked. If we fast forward to the present, we are now able to experience the Mines of Moria expansion again thanks to the Legendary server. These are progression servers that start with the vanilla release and slowly raise the level cap over time, allowing players to re-experience each Lotro expansion, but with the quality of life improvements of the live servers. As stated before in my previous video covering Shadows of Angmar, this is not a classic server in the traditional sense. My first experience with a legendary server was back in 2018 when they released the first of many legendary servers, Anor. I played a lot on Anor and really enjoyed a lot of the early group content of both the vanilla and Mines of Moria releases. However, back then, it was clear that power creep had really affected the difficulty of a lot of the group content. Raids were a lot easier to run through, and there was a lot less challenge, which made some of the veteran players a bit salty. This time around, with the release of the Angmar server in the US and the Mordor server in Europe, they released a difficulty mechanic called the Veil of the Nine, which I explained about extensively in my review of the Shadows of Angmar content about 2 months ago. This introduced difficult mobs in the form of powerful ring wraiths that spawn near you while you are adventuring in the open world. Every now and then you'll spawn one of the 9, which leads to a full-out raid party of 50+ players attempting to take these bosses down. An enjoyable mechanic which I quite enjoy. With the release of Moria, due to lore reasons, they had to alter this mechanic a bit and introduced powerful goblin assassins, orc executioners, and troll titans to disrupt your travels within the Dark Abyss. These mobs, like the wraith above, drop currency that you can trade in for reputation, which will, in the long run, give you some cosmetics and some limited gear selection. This whole mechanic helps to keep players on their toes and brings challenge to what is normally a fairly easy open world to navigate in modern Lotro, if you do not use the difficulty sliders. Standing Stone Games also spent some time balancing a lot of the Moria instances to make them feel more challenging and relevant again, and as far as I know from the community, they were able to succeed with this for the most part. I only wish that they had implemented this at the start of the server when it was initially released back in August. My hope is that they continue to provide balance for each expansion's group content going forward. I think this will help to keep players around as the server continues to raise its cap over the next several years. We have a lot of expansions to cover, some of which were high points and some of which were low points of the game. I just hope that during the low points, SSG can strategize and think of ways to make the endgame more appealing for players in 2025 and beyond. I'm specifically thinking of expansions like the Riders of Rohan and Helm's Deep. What are your thoughts, Lotro players? I'd be curious to know. With Mines of Moria, we begin Volume 2 of the epic quest storyline, which leads us to the Walls of Moria, just outside the main entrance. We encounter a group of long-beard dwarves who seek to retake their homeland. However, they must first dig through a large pile of rubble that has enclosed the entrance. Little do they know the cause of this rock slide, and we soon find out when the Watcher in the Water makes its appearance and attacks us, sending many of the dwarves that have accompanied us to their doom. We must retreat and seek a much more powerful weapon to overcome this dangerous adversary. This is where we are introduced to the legendary weapon mechanic. When we first acquire this legendary weapon, it contains many empty slots where over time, through questing, gaining experience on a reward track, and earning currency known as Ancient Script, we are able to slot in stat bonuses to our weapon known as traceries, which cause the weapon to become much more powerful. As stated before, this system was introduced at the launch of Moria, but was changed twice through various updates, and the current system we have was actually implemented in a much more recent expansion, the Fate of Gundabad. Once we have our new powerful weapon, we are able to drive the Watcher in the Water away and successfully enter the Mines of Moria. From this point onwards, I don't really want to spoil much of the story, but basically you are sent on various quests that help with you retaking Moria and driving out evil within it. Overall, I felt that the epic quest line had a very strong beginning, but kind of drops in quality during the later chapters. I really hate to say this because I think the story in Lord of the Rings Online as a whole is really well done and accurate to the work of Tolkien. But if I had to rank the different volumes of the epic storyline in Lotro, I would probably rank Volume 2 at the bottom. I really don't like the whole story with the orc Mazog. I always thought that was a bit of a silly plot thread. For those who have played the story, you know what I'm referring to. I just think future volumes do such a better job with character development, and even the first volume is far superior, in my humble opinion. Let me know if you guys agree or disagree with this, because of course, this is not a fact, it's just my opinion. Also, the backtracking in the epic questline can get quite tedious, where you are sent out to Lothlorien and sent back into Moria several times over the course of the expansion. There have been additional stable masters that have been added in to make things a little less tedious, but I still feel like I'm playing a horse riding and goat riding simulator half the time. The gear rewards can be quite useful for getting your stats high enough to be effective in some of the lower difficulty group instances before you start earning your Moria medallions, so it can be worth it to complete it. The Walls of Moria is the first zone that we experience and is an extension of the region of Eregion. This is where we are approaching the main western entrance to the Dwarven Halls of Moria. The place is overgrown and foul, and many a fell beast have entered the water and land. Here we first meet the company of dwarves who have returned to reopen the door and learn the fate of the last monarch of Khazad-dûm. The Walls of Moria serve as the introduction section for entering Moria proper. The quest here can only be completed before the dwarves open Moria. I almost hesitate to call this zone a real zone. It is more like a starter area with a few handful of level 50 quests that branch off from the epic quest. It's almost like the instanced level 1 areas that you experience at the start of the game, a brief tutorial of what's to come. While the quests here are fairly enjoyable, it is one of a few areas in the game where the epic quests are mandatory to progress into Moria. This can get tedious if you like to level a lot of alts, but it is what it is and doesn't take too long to progress through. The first part of Moria rediscovered by Western travelers, the region bound by the famous and recently reopened Hall Gate, serves as both a gateway and a crossroads. This portion of Khazad-dûm, known as the Great Delving, connects mines to palaces, academies, to foundries, and Moria's vast area beneath Eriador's western lands. This is where the story of Khazad-dûm's restoration and rescue truly begins. Much of the Great Delving features an unusual mix of dwarf-cut masterpieces and raw, unshaped stone. In other parts of the region, the ruins of enormous works are crumbling back into the ground. It is truly a memorable moment to enter through Moria's door and see the vast staircase within Durin's threshold for the very first time. The zone really works to create a sense of awe and wonder and anticipation for how vast this region truly is. Clearly still a work of art to this day. I also found the quests of this level 51 zone to be fairly linear in how they push you forward while still allowing you to wander off and explore its ancient halls. This allows for limited backtracking and an overall enjoyable and thrilling experience. Just make sure to get a goat before you enter, as horse mounts are not viable in Moria. You can get a goat from maxing out your reputation with Thorin's Hall, allowing you to purchase a goat from one of the reputation vendors there. Or if you have patience, you can take your time and earn a goat further down the quest chain as you progress deeper into the zone. The enemies you'll be dealing with are mainly going to be goblins and their camps, deep claws, a beast-type creature with a bird-like beak, grod bogs, centipede-like creatures that live together in hives, typically led by a giant queen of their species. Next, you are led south into the Silvertine Lodes. This vast area has a large labyrinth of mine tracks sprawling to many dead ends. Here you will come across the Great Pit of Menem-Berej. This is the middle of the Silvertine Lodes, where the earth appears to give way to darkness. The dwarves of Khazad-dûm excavated deep here without caution or reason, and in their greed hid one of their great treasures in this shaft, close on the verge of oblivion. This is also the location of the first group instance you're going to come across, the Forgotten Treasury. While there is not as much visual eye candy here for the player, the quests here can be enjoyable. There is a lot of windiness when you are questing in the whole Menem-Berej area, and it is probably not the most efficient questing compared to a lot of zones, but also doesn't stand out to the point where it's an annoying area to be in by any means. Overall, an average location to quest in. I did enjoy my time in the old Silvertine City, which essentially has one quest giver. Most of the mobs you'll be encountering in this zone are going to be the same mobs you encountered in the Great Delving, just raised to level 52, with the addition of the green glow worms that you will also come across. The next zone you will be led to quest in is Durin's Way, named after the oldest of the 7 fathers of the dwarves, Durin of the Longbeards, and the 6th monarch to carry his name, the second last to rule in Khazad-dûm. The path taken by the Fellowship of the Ring from the 3-way intersection to the Chamber of Mazarbul, and then to the second hall, runs along the southern portion of Durin's Way. Saruman's cruel white-hand orcs command the orcs who live in Durin's Way. In addition, there are recruited goblins with their terrible warg mounts, as well as the Maravel, an ancient demonic race that has not been seen in many generations. This level 53 area has a lot of variety, and thus I have a lot of mixed opinions regarding this zone. You've got the Chamber of Crossroads, where lies the iconic well, the same well where Pippin foolishly dropped a stone down if you read the books, or knocked a whole skeleton down in the movies, which of course alerted unwanted ears of the Fellowship's presence. Questing here is fairly straightforward and easy to navigate. I also really enjoyed questing in Tharak-Bazan. This is an area where you are given a brief respite from the dark, gloomy caverns of other zones and presented with an underground forest lit by numerous crystals and light shafts from the top of the cavern. You close out your adventures by questing in the Fanged Pit, where you are wreaking havoc among the winged Maravel camps. This area is one of my least favorite questing spots, as I found the whole spot to just be kind of dull aesthetically. Just a lot of bland stalagmites to see, and a lot of circling around to travel to quest objectives. Not my cup of tea, exactly. Let's also not forget to talk about Zirakzigil. There's not really many quests in this zone, but you will be led here briefly after you finish the Fanged Pit quests, and also the epic quests will lead you here later on. Zirakzigil, or Celebdil in Sindarin, is one of the 3 peaks of the Misty Mountains, below which lie the Halls of Moria. More recently, Zirakzigil was subjected to a fierce fight of fire and lightning, causing the mountainside to crumble. Anyone who witnessed the epic conflict believed that a terrible storm was raging in the mountains. The truth came out later, and of course, we know this to be the epic encounter between Gandalf the Grey and the Balrog. Spoilers, I know, but it's a 15-plus-year-old game. Here you will find the remains of the Balrog, which Gandalf slew, and you will also be brought back here to complete the 3-person or solo quest instance, the Mere Halls of Lumulnar. When you reach level 54, players will usually head down to the Waterworks. The Waterworks territory is made out of a single massive cavern beneath the mountain that is divided into organized sections by an aqueduct network, where aqueduct lines cross, imposing structures ranging from functional palaces to high pillars rise. This pristine layout intersects with a cavern wall at a series of modest structures and plazas with stained glass windows. While it is truly a beautiful area of the expansion, it is, albeit, my least favorite place to quest in the entire expansion. This has to do with a lot of verticality in this zone, which leads to lots of endless backtracking. Yes, the quests make you backtrack a lot in this zone, especially if you are looking to complete the quest deed here. Yeah, I really find this zone to be quite painful, especially at the end when you are at the giant water wheel getting lost in this large maze of water tunnels. Basically, I never really enjoy this zone, and I still don't enjoy this zone. I do think it's an important area to experience once on your main character, but after that, if you are running an alt, I'd take a break and grind some missions or skirmishes so that you can skip to the next area. This area also connects to two of Moria's infamous raids, the Vile Maw and Philakul. Once you are level 55, you will be making your way to the 21st Hall, which is sort of the main hub of the expansion, where you will see many level-capped players chilling, sending LFGs for raids, and other such group instances. There are also a plethora of NPCs, crafting services, and vendors who sell powerful gear that you will need to grind instances for in order to earn the proper currency to purchase such gear. But for now, you will be starting a quest line that will take you through the whole zone beyond the 21st Hall, which is Zelem-melek. In modern Lotro, the questing here is quite streamlined and enjoyable, as most of the time you get quests bestowed upon you by simply exploring the different areas bit by bit, making your way all the way down to the settlement of Orkwatch in the Redhorn Lodes. It's in general an easy questing experience, and I like the greater focus on exploration and having quests pop up as you explore, rather than constantly running back to NPCs at the start of the zone. At the beginning, there are some areas that can be a bit confusing, especially if you are in the Great Hall of Durin, as there are a lot of stairs and vertical overlap, but once you've quested there once, it's not all that bad, and I find it quite manageable. This brings us to the Redhorn Lodes, which is another area similar to the Silvertine Lodes, but is geared towards the level 56 players. Here you are connected to the 6-man Grand Stair instance, and you are given a series of quests that deal with wiping out Moria Orc and Isengard Orc encampments. At this point, once you are nearing the level 60 cap, I find that most of the quests from all the regions here on out become fairly efficient and easy to complete, with lots of auto-bestool quests coming your way. The Flaming Deeps region is no exception. When Durin ruled, these lower depths were home to the Dwarves of Moria, who worked tirelessly in the smithies and huge forges, fueled by steady streams of war from the Redhorn Lodes. The dwarves worked tirelessly to extract gold, iron, and mithril, finally rousing the terrible Balrog from its slumber deep in the shadowy abyss and forcing their own exodus. This is sort of the hellish lava pit zone of Moria. I'm always typically a big fan of lava zones, and you are introduced to another two group instances here with the forges of Khazad-dûm and Fil Gashan. We are next led to one of the most majestic areas of Moria, Nud-melek. Moria's easternmost portion is also its most ancient. This is the Khazad-dûm of old, the halls excavated out of the mountain by the dwarves of the First Age. Here we are able to see the broken bridge of Khazad-dûm, and even are given a vision of the events that transpired there. The questing here involves you escorting a dwarf to the opposite side of the Great Chasm by circling around it, stopping periodically to take out enemy camps and sabotage their equipment. I really love the draw distance and scale of this area. This is definitely another location where you can see how effortlessly the world builders at Turbine Studios work to make this expansion really come to life. Again, exploring this zone will lead us to another 6-man instance, the 16th Hall. But it is here where I also yearn to take a break from my questing in Moria. We still have one more zone within Moria that we haven't traveled to yet. But it's here where the game encourages us to take a peek outside on the far east end of Moria. I also feel that this is the part of the expansion where a lot of folks will start to miss the outdoors. Everything was so jaw-droppingly amazing when we first entered Moria, but eventually you begin to miss having the sun and the brightness of day accompany you on your adventures. A sense of claustrophobia hits you. Lothlorien provides a very good respite from this, even if some of the quests are kind of tedious due to their replayable nature. Lothlorien is basically one giant hub with multiple repeatable quests that you are encouraged to grind to gain kindred reputation with the Galadrim faction. Getting kindred will allow you to purchase a variety of endgame jewelry, cosmetics, and other odds and ends. Currency to acquire this jewelry can be earned by completing the daily quests that you find there. But despite this, let's remember that this is Lothlorien, the Golden Wood. Whether it's daytime or nighttime, this zone has really magical and awe-inspiring vibes. During the day, the golden leaves shine brightly as you gaze upon the series of spiraling wooden stairs and platforms of Caras Galadhon, a city erected high among the Golden Wood's largest golden leaf malorn trees. It is here Lady Galadriel and Celeborn rule atop their land from the highest malorn tree, the House of Celeborn. I find questing here to be kind of similar to our experience questing in the Shire. On the outskirts, you will find conflict with patrolling orcs and wargs, but within the Golden Wood, you are mainly picking flowers, meditating in secluded areas, singing to heal corrupt trees, and running errands for the vineyard. It's a nice break from the gloom, yet unfortunately, the epic quest sends us back into the depths of Moria once again to deal with some more evil threats that are left in the wake of the Balrog. After catching up with the Fellowship, we are sent by the elves of Lorien to take care of more unfinished business in Moria. This leads us to the final zone of Moria, the Foundations of Stone. Moria's darkest part is a murky abyss, a scary, enormous, and bizarre world formed of twisted stones, treacherous rivers, and gathering fog. These dark gaps in the soil are haunted by terrifying monsters, lurking among swollen and blazing mushrooms, hiding in the shadows beneath bizarre arches and living rock spurs. This is not the easiest zone to quest in, but the atmosphere really makes up for it here. The developers clearly noted the references to nameless things in the deep in Tolkien's work, and used their creativity and imagination to craft a zone that truly captures that atmosphere while taking some Lovecraftian liberties in their designs of the different nameless creatures that you encounter. I might have to actually say that this is my favorite zone in Moria, despite the twisted tunnels that repeatedly get me lost each time I level a character through. This is a level 59 zone, yet often by the time I get here, I'm already level 60, and I'm just here to grind out some deeds and get my virtue levels up. But even still, I think this zone is fantastic, simply based on the atmosphere that it conveys. It also connects you to two more 6-player instances of Scumfill and Dark Delvings. This is also where the raid Dar Narbogud takes place. Now that I've covered all the major questing areas of the expansion, let's talk a little bit about my experiences with the group instances. Unlike when I was playing through Shadows of Angmar, I've been taking a bit more time with my endgame grind in Moria. First of all, the instances in Moria were balanced by SSG to retain their challenging elements, whereas in SOA, they kind of failed to do that. Which means you have to spend a lot more time learning how to get good before you can just pug and tackle all the instances. Group wipes are a lot more common now, and it's become important to actually research the different fights that you will encounter so that you can prepare yourself adequately and not be a liability to your team. Now, Lotro has a much more forgiving community than a lot of MMOs, and you are allowed to make mistakes. But I would advise you to state clearly your experience with each of the instances. Doing so will usually prompt one of the group members to take initiative and walk you through it. That's not to say that all of the instances are like this. There are a few instances that are great for players that haven't experienced this content frequently enough or are completely new players. I know for me, I joined the game around the release of Helm's Deep, and never got to experience these instances when it was the endgame on the live servers. I also always tended to be more of a solo player, especially in the early days of me engaging with this game. It's just important and respectful to maintain honest communication more than before, and it's also often recommended that you state your desired role of play, whether that be DPS, tank, healer, or support. That out of the way, I will talk about some of the instances that I did engage with. Forgotten Treasury is the first instance you will come across. It's made to be a lower level instance that you can participate with even if you are not at level cap. It's a great instance to break up your leveling, and there's a lot of cool little puzzle mechanics that you can engage with, but it's not the most rewarding for endgame progression, because it doesn't frequently, if at all, drop your needed endgame currency of Moria medallions, which are essential for getting gear to help you tackle the more difficult instances and raids. Grand Stair is the next instance that becomes available to you and is the ideal dungeon for players of all ability levels and gear to grind for that lovely endgame currency. It's not overly challenging. People run this instance in different modes. There's a challenge mode where at the end you have to avoid killing a certain mob by stopping all AoE attacks. Actually, this seems like a mechanic that tends to repeat itself in other instances. But yeah, make sure you know what you are doing and are paying attention when completing these challenges. If you miss the fine print, you might end up failing these challenges for the whole group without fully being aware of what you just did. That might have happened to me once or twice. FYI, once you gain your confidence and a few pieces of Moria gear, you can also start running forges and the 16th Hall. With forges, I have difficulty understanding the barrel puzzle mechanic and the rhythm of the AoE fire damage that shoots out at you if you stand in the wrong place, but I'm learning. I've enjoyed the 16th Hall a lot, although it does tend to drag out a bit. Also make sure that everybody is ready before you charge the final boss, or you might get locked out of the fight if you don't press the W key at the same time as everybody else. The goal, from what I've heard from most people, is to work on getting your morale to over 3,000. If you're able to achieve this, you can start to engage with some of the more challenging content like the Watcher and Turtle. I haven't done Scumfill, Thilgashan, or Dark Delvings yet, but may try to get a bit more courageous here soon once I've got another piece of my Moria set. Let's not forget to mention that Lothlorien also has its instances as well with slightly different currency. I did manage to run Halls of Craft, which is a good middle ground of teaching you how to avoid standing in the wrong place and getting one-shotted by AoE fire damage. But basically, at this point, the game encourages the player to mix and match different gear from both Moria and Lothlorien currencies to properly build out your character's endgame stats. Both gear is good, but some gear might boost your health morale, while others might boost your damage, critical rating, or mitigations. So in the end, it's kind of up to you to mix and match. The Dar Narbagud raid is supposed to be the most challenging content at the moment, and that is something I may not be quite prepared to do for a while. Thankfully, I have until the end of April to figure that out before we get our next level cap raise with the release of Siege of Mirkwood. I also want to briefly talk about Skirmishes. With the release of Moria on the legendary servers, we have also unlocked the ability to participate in a type of instance called Skirmishes. These instances scale with your level, and you are able to run these either solo, duo, 3-man, 6-man, or a 12-man raid. With these skirmishes, you are given the ability to summon a soldier who will help you fight alongside the enemy. There are many different soldiers to choose from, and at this point in the server's cap, all of the soldiers might have some legitimate use. But according to the community, as the level cap increases, these soldiers fail to scale appropriately, meaning at later levels they become less relevant. However, lots of players tend to use either the Herbalist for some heals, or the Sage for providing debuffs to enemies. There are 3 different types of skirmishes that you can run: offensive, defensive, and survival. Now, throwing this out there, I know of almost nobody who runs a survival skirmish, of which there is only one available, but essentially you keep fighting enemies as long as you can until you succumb to defeat. Secondly, we have the defense skirmish, which places you and your soldier in a location where you and a few NPCs have to defend from multiple invading forces that come from different directions. Your goal is to defeat swarms of enemies attacking your position. Typically, there are 3 or 4 assaults before the skirmish culminates in a final boss battle to conclude the instance. The most popular and fun skirmishes are the offensive ones, where you have to take over different checkpoints in the instance, fight off counterattacks, and finally push your way to the final boss. There are a few reasons why these are run more often. Firstly, they give really good XP and are also quicker to complete and repeat more than any of the other skirmish modes. This allows for an efficient way of leveling your character and is something I did a lot when leveling my captain alt. Missions are also a viable way of leveling, but always have a daily cooldown, while skirmishes do not. Now, I don't really recommend that you ever use this method of leveling on your first character, but sometimes open world questing can get tedious after doing it for the 3rd or 4th time, and this system of leveling helps to greatly break up the monotony in between questing. Just note that you won't be gaining much virtue XP from this, so you'll have to grind a bit for those a lot more once you've made it to the level cap. Let's also keep in mind that there are a lot of different things that you can purchase from the marks and medallions that the skirmishes drop, from leveling gear to cosmetics, reputation items, and leveling up your soldiers. Now, some of you who know a bit about Lotro might be wondering, didn't skirmishes release with the Siege of Mirkwood expansion? And you would be right, but since they introduced skirmishes into the epic questline of Moria, SSG found it more sensible to introduce them earlier, which I'm quite fond of because I like skirmishes. One last thing I would like to briefly go over are the 3 factions that this expansion introduces. The first 2 being the Iron Garrison Guards and the Iron Garrison Miners of Moria. I couldn't find a lot of uses for maxing these factions out, but either way, you probably will easily max them without trying. There are some class deeds you can complete with them. However, from what I know, you basically just get rewarded some Lotro points for completing them, which is handy for using the free-to-play cash shop, but very little else. It used to mean something more back when a lot of the trait points you get from leveling up were tied to completing deeds, but this is no longer the case. The Galadhrim of Lothlorien are a lot more useful, as reaching kindred status will allow you to purchase some halfway decent jewelry gear, as well as provide you with crafting recipes that can actually be quite useful. So, if you are still watching, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button, as that would do me a huge favor, and thanks a bunch. To conclude, Moria has been a blast to play through, and I have been having tons of fun pugging and leveling alts, taking my time. I think this is a great time to step in and play on the legendary server. There's a great community here, as always. I'm currently a part of the Legacy kinship, which, as far as I know, is one of the largest kinships on the server, where there are always lots of players online. So maybe I'll bump into you in game sometime. The server I am currently playing on is Angmar. Also, a big shout out to the Lotro Wiki for providing me with some good lore descriptions and backdrops for the different zones that you explore as you journey in Moria. Thanks a bunch for watching, and I'll see you next time.